company that Philip and I worked for when we first met in the mid-1990s had salespeople all over the country. Tampa, Boston, Seattle, and as it plays a part in this story, Roseau, Minnesota. For those of you who don't know where Roseau is, it is so far north that you can hit Canada with a well-thrown rock. Philip makes fun of Roseau for it being much farther north in our state.
That's right. They just got television, Dan, in 72, I think. They couldn't even watch the state high school hockey tournament.
And one of the last places that didn't have a party line. When I first started traveling up there in the 90s, they had still people talking about the fact that they had a party telephone line where you just picked up and asked the operator. So now the owner of the firm that we worked for was and still is a bit of a pioneer, especially in the area of technology. And he was dead set that we could save tons of money by doing all of our training via video conferencing on the internet. So we spent tens of thousands of dollars on software and equipment that we sent out to all of our salespeople. And then each and every time we had a training session, Philip would valiantly attempt to hold it on a video conference. And of course, it never really worked. A few people could connect, but the fact was that towns like Roseau, Minnesota just didn't have the bandwidth to support video at that point. And so invariably, the fellow up there wouldn't be able to connect. And after 10 to 15 minutes of my frantic attempts to get him sorted out, Philip would throw in the towel and just say, "Dan, get us on a telephone call." And we would go back to the plain old telephone system.
10-minute rule.
Right. Now, I've always thought of this story as being about the limitations of technology, but as we all have been forced to shift to virtual meetings and virtual work during the pandemic, it has become more and more obvious to me that the technology isn't an issue anymore, but we still have lots of work to do on developing the human side of working virtually. That leads us to episode 51 of the Valuability Podcast, Building High-Performance Teams in a Virtual World, Part 2, with special guest Todd Mauney. The Valuability Podcast is for anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. Whether you are a financial professional, business owner, individual investor, or employee, we believe that financial success comes from creating a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will get you there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I am joined each week by my co-host friend and mentor, Philip Simonson. We've been in the financial services industry for 20 and 40 years, respectively, both as financial advisors and in a wide range of roles on the wholesale and retail sides of the business. Now, Todd, once again, thank you so much for making time for us a second week in a row. And let's go back and review. We started going through the steps, the 7 overall steps that you have for building high-performance teams. We got up through the beginning of step 6. So why don't we start by reviewing those steps, and then we'll continue on from there.
Yeah, good day, gentlemen. Glad to be back. And yes, I think it would be great to do a quick recap here. So yeah, step 1 was set and reset leadership mindset, right? As leaders, change begins with us. We've got to assess our belief systems, our thoughts. And in a crisis like we're experiencing these days with COVID, all the more important that we really get a read on ourselves. What's our belief system around what's going on? Are we trapped in a victim mindset? Are we going on defense? Are we in a defensive mindset mode, or are we in an offensive mindset mode? Because in crisis, we have to go on offense as soon as possible. Defense at first, then go to offense. And we have to have the right mindset to do that. Step 2, develop a simple business plan. We have to have a North Star. We have to have a sense of direction and get the team coalesced around that, moving in a forward direction in that offensive posture. If we sit around too long, it leads to infighting. It creates, allows our fears to kick in. We get stuck, and that's not a good thing, especially in a situation like we're in today. So we have to be moving forward, and a plan helps us to do that. Critically, we need to also be operating at full force, and processes and systems allow us to do that. Most companies have repetitive processes, things they have to do consistently, and they need to be doing consistently well. Mapping out those critical processes allows everybody to do those things effectively, efficiently, and consistently well. But it also allows every individual to know what role they're playing in maximizing those procedures and getting the work done. So not only are you helping everyone be more effective in their roles, you're also giving them critical clarity about what their responsibilities are so that we're not bumping into each other and redundantly working on things. Step 4 is to clarify your position descriptions. So once everybody's clear about their roles, responsibilities, and they're operating more effectively together, it's a good time to kind of assess what the positions that you have really are. So we talked about the critical processes, but everybody's doing a lot more than just those repetitive processes. And it's a good time during these times to really get clear about what every individual on your team is doing. Because they may not be clear, or they may be doing things that you're not appreciating that they're doing. And we're in a day when we're really stretching our resources. People are operating out of virtual environments, and it's all the more difficult to know what everybody's doing. So it's really important that we assess that. Then we move to step 5, which is to really kind of do a gap analysis of your current team versus what you really need to have to get to that next level that you're after. So now that we have clear position descriptions, we can kind of do a blue sky thinking process to kind of determine what do we really need. This is great. We're clear about what we have and what we're doing, but what do we really need to get to that next level? And with so many changes going on in the business world around us, it can be a great time to capitalize on new hires. So this is a real good step to get yourself in a position to really know what that next new hire position is, which leads us right into number 6 and where we're picking up from last week, which is to hire the right people and onboard them in the right way. So again, I just mentioned, how can we turn lemons into lemonade these days? One of the opportunities that we have as business leaders is to make some really good hiring choices, because a lot of companies are downsizing, they're scaling back. There's redundancy in their business model. Some of them are hurting, and they just have to flat lay some good quality people off. So it can be a ripe opportunity to hire some really good talent out there. And in doing so, we need to be very intentional about this. This is where we were talking last week about the cost of making bad hiring decisions. Mm-hmm. Our people represent usually our largest expense line item. And that's just the hard cost of payroll and benefits and total comp. But what we don't really as business owners recognize is the cost of a bad employee and the impact that they have on us as leaders, other leaders within the company, and other employees in our work product. Because when you have somebody that's in the wrong position, the wrong seat on the bus, if you will, it leads to oftentimes conflict with other people that they're working with. It could involve, the fact that they're not operating at the level that they need to because they don't have the critical skills that they need to have to do the job effectively and things like that. And when you really add all that up, it can be very, very disruptive and costly to the business.
I'll jump in there and say at one of the businesses I worked for, they had done an actual study of the economic impact of replacing a salesperson. And it was probably a rounded number, but they very consistently referred to it being $1 million decision.
Yes.
That in terms of lost revenue from replacing the salesperson and the training and the relocation and benefits and everything that went into it, they counted up. And so they really pressed that down on management when we would be doing interviews. They also had a great interview process. So even though I was an internal manager, I was involved in interviewing the external salespeople because it interfaced with us. Mm-hmm. And we were considered part of that hiring team. And they were relentless about that. Make a good decision. Don't make a decision just to make a decision. If the right person's not in the pool, don't just say yes to the best person if they're not going to make it, because we'd rather wait another couple weeks or another couple months and get the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's real tempting to try to rush that decision because a lot of companies get caught off guard and they're like, geez, well, if we lose that person, boy, we're in a predicament because we need to fill that position quickly. We don't have the capacity to take on that work or what have you. And that's why I covered the previous steps in the order that I covered them. Because if you're clear about your position descriptions, you're clear what everybody's doing, everybody's clear about what they need to be doing, and you have processes outlined, it makes it all the easier to be able to stand in the gap when that person is gone and allow yourself some time to be able to find the right hire.
And Todd would piggyback on a couple things. Dan mentioned the sales rep in the lost a cost of $1 million. I've once read, and please confirm, if it's an employee, not a salesperson, but if their salary, let's just say it's $50,000, it'll cost either 100,000, 100% to 150,000, and when you add up the lost productivity,
Right.
The time it takes to bring that person back up to speed, etc. So I couldn't concur more than what you just said. Take your time, get the selection process right. Because if where you get it wrong is, and when I'd go see some of our, divisional managers, they'd tell me, well, that was, it was a bad hire. And I thought, well, I bought into that a few times. And then I realized, no, until my mentor grabbed me and said, no, once in a while you'll get a bad hire. But that person, here's generally what's happening. If they end up saying 6 months from now, this isn't what I signed up for, then they being the employee or the rep, they didn't let you down. You let them down because you didn't do the steps you outlined ahead of time. Got real clear on the roles and responsibilities. And you mentioned something else too. If I don't get the right hire and I'm the leader here, that has an impact on the rest of my management team and
Yes.
the rest of the employees, because they're looking for me for the leadership. And
Correct.
then if I bring them aboard and then I don't even do anything with them, I let them still get paid. What's the message you're sending? It's okay to fail here and you still get paid. And then you got the other people who are doing very, very well, and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's going to be just enchanting to them. And you're never going to create that high performance culture.
No, it's a critical breach of trust, from a leadership perspective. Because they're trusting you to define the rules and hold tight to the rules and play and call the shots fairly.
Yes.
And that right there, what you just described so well, Philip, is really one of the core sources of conflict within companies. That the rules aren't being followed and applied equally across all employees. Some employees seem to get the slide, if you will, and get by with things that other employees don't seem to feel like they get by with. So you're absolutely right. And here's the thing. When you get to a point where you have a remedial issue with an employee, they're not working out for whatever reason. It may be them underperforming. It may be just a wrong fit, and I usually give them the benefit of the doubt. It's just a bad choice. We made a bad hire. We made a bad fit. It's not necessarily something inherently wrong with this person, because we don't want to treat them like they're, trash because it didn't work out. We want to treat them with dignity and respect and just say, look, it's just not working out. It's not a good fit. But here's the thing. When we make a good, very intentional hiring decision, we go through a good, intentional hiring interviewing process, and then we take a new employee through an onboarding process. Expectations are usually set very well and clear. One of the biggest and most damaging mistakes that leaders make is holding on to someone that's not working out way too long. And it's painful. It's costly and it's painful. It's painful for the employee. It's painful for the employer. It's painful for all the employees that are having to observe it, because they know They're like, this isn't working. Why don't they let this person go? And it's like, oh, so frustrating. But here's the thing. Leaders struggle with getting to that point of a decision because they want to look back and they want to take appropriate responsibility for not setting the right expectations, not setting things up the right way, and they want to try to somehow hit a reset button at that point. And that's not easy. So rather than go through all that, just do it right to begin with. Hire right, onboard them correctly.
And I'm going to raise my hand in guilty as charged. Initially, when I started off
Aren't
in
we all?
management and leadership, I waited way too long to let the person go. As a matter of fact, when I finally let these people go, they knew they wanted to go before I knew they wanted to
Yes.
go, and they just was hoping someone would come in and do it.
A lot of times they're relieved.
They're
Yeah.
relieved, exactly.
Absolutely.
So I also learned a couple other things with this. Is that it's I went with this, saying it's easier to fire than to develop a person. So even if I had all these steps down, as you've described them, Todd, I still could have a chance. It could be a willingness issue. It could have some outside items from going through some difficult times with their family, anything that could keep them from being distracted. Well, I would always, and that's a generalization always, but what I learned is that I would sit down with them and I was going to have that open, honest, frank conversation. And it was going to be, look, I'm here. I want to help you grow and develop. And here's what we're going to do, and list out the specific I've also described what's the one or two things they need to start doing. And if they do, what's going to be the benefit to them, and what are the one or two things they need to stop doing, and what's going to be the one or two benefits, and then listing them out. And then we're going to have a check-in in 30 days. Because I loved your term, and maybe you can talk more about it. You call it the cadence meetings. Can you explore, define that a little bit better for the audience, and how you work these?
Yeah, it's been said that soldiers can be in cadence and march over a bridge and tear the bridge down by the power of the cadence. And it's a rhythm, is what it is. It's a rhythm. It's a sequential rhythm, and in the context that I'm describing it, it's a rhythm of communication, and it can have the same powerful effect as marching. Right, so we're moving in the same direction. We're powerfully creating synergy in our communication. It's the opportunity to sync up, right? Are we on the same page? Do we know what our mutual interests are? Which, by the way, is a foundation for managing through conflict.
Mm.
Understanding what are our mutual interests, what's our common sense of purpose here? Because we can have all these differences, but if we can land firmly on that, then we have a foundation to be able to move through the conflict. Because that's the anchor that keeps us from being destroyed in the process of conflict. So the cadence allows us to take a plan, turn it into individual responsibilities and accountabilities, and communicate those along the way so that we manage expectations mutually with one another. How am I doing? What do you need from me? Type of conversations to keep moving forward and making progress. And if we're doing that really well, we rarely get to a place where we're kind of caught off guard and not clear whether it's a will versus skill issue that somebody's not working out.
Right.
At this point in the conversation, I start thinking about, as I shared on previous podcasts, I was a bit of a maverick as a kid, didn't like rules. I was sharp enough that a lot of times I didn't need the rules to apply to me. I could just kind of steamroll through and get by on my ability. And it was quite a ways into my career before I started to realize that existing that way just isn't comfortable. Like coming in every morning and not knowing what you need to do, when it needs to be done by. There's always especially for people of high ability and entrepreneurs, this idea that I just get it done, right? I don't need a job description. I don't need a
Right.
project plan. Just get it done. Very, very driver mentality a lot of times in the
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur mindset. And I was no different than that. I thought, man, I'll take care of it all. Just give me that. I can take care of it. But once you get to the point where you can accept that, hey, this communication helps and it calms things down, it makes you feel better. For me, it was kind of like the realization when I got into college that, hey, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't wait until the night before the paper's due to write it. If I write it the weekend before it's due, it feels a lot better that week. And things are a lot calmer. Things are a lot more organized. And heaven forbid it allows me to think, hey, maybe I want to go back and rewrite that paragraph. So at a certain point, you realize that, again, it's how I started out last episode, this idea that form eventually frees you, right? That these things eventually allow you to be free. And especially as a business owner, if you're the person that's plugged in, and I heard somebody talking about Jeff Bezos, that probably him stepping down at Amazon has this exact thing. This has been your life for the last 35 years. Everything is dependent on you. And you finally get to step back and do some other things while let the business run itself.
Yes. Yeah, you make some very good points, Dan. And cadence is there's two primary values from my perspective around having a cadence of communication. One is, and it all leads to that liberating kind of experience that you're describing, but one is managing expectations, right? Because we're working as a team. That means that we're codependent. I'm counting on you to get things done. You're counting on me to get things done. You're counting on me to help you get things done, and that whole dynamic. So if we're managing the communication, we're managing expectations, we're able to help each other, right? Help me to help you. The other thing, though, is that, thinking about Stephen Covey's four quadrants, we tend to be victims to the tyranny of the urgent, right? We're operating as quivering masses of availability.
Bowl of jelly. I just got the bowl of jelly visualization.
If we don't manage these things in an intentional way, then we're really not managing. The second key is priorities. It's really about priority management. So for those executives that say, I don't have time to write that down, I just get up every day, I know what I got to do, I just get it done. The problem with that is that things change so quickly, even during the day, from hour to hour for most business leaders. I mean, you get a phone call and it could completely derail everything that you've set out to try to do. So at least if you have something written down and you're communicating that with someone, it gives you some structures to be able to stay on top of your priorities.
Well, and now that people are potentially not going to be co-located as much, you have to have these kinds of
Yes.
communications. Like they have to be there. Whereas you could walk in and look and say, oh, I see Amy has a stack of invoices she hasn't done, invoicing yet. In the future, that may not be possible. You might not be able to get those physical cues anymore from people. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is how do we now build these things for a virtual world?
Hmm. Well, and actually, we're starting to transition into conversation around the last step there, which is leveraging the Tuckman model as a perpetual cycle for performance as a team. And I'll talk about the Tuckman model a little bit here in a second. But one thing, just anecdotally to mention, as you're talking about, Dan, is the importance of more frequent touch points in a virtual world. That is really critical now that we're more separated. One of the keys to leadership in a virtual world is, one, as a leader, spending more individual time with your employees. Jimmy Johnson was brilliant at this with the Cowboys. If anybody's listening has watched the 30 over 30 interview and story of Jimmy Johnson, that's one of his claims to fame, is that he recognized that every player on his team was an individual. It's not a one size fits all kind of managing strategy. You've got to know your individual players, what makes them tick, what are their strengths, their weaknesses, how do you need to communicate to them, how do you need to help develop them and coach them. Everybody's different, and leaders have to really work harder at that these days. And that's hard for entrepreneurs because we like to just be on the fringes, working hard, pushing hard. To spend time with employees is sometimes exhaustive, but we've got to spend more time with them individually and collectively more touch points.
And I'm going to bounce back to step 6 and then bring it back forward again. And I'm just what I like about it is that and the what I like and the piece that I like put the subject in is your assessment tools. And I've used them before. That gives me the information I need to know those in the new hire as an individual, and what makes them, what motivates them, what makes them tick. And the other bit I want to also tie in is that when you described those cadence meetings as purposes, it must have a purpose. The way I used to, learned how to position that purpose is the twofold benefit. One, takes the focus off the individual and puts it on the behavior of what you're looking for.
Yes.
Right? Because my teenage boys, I'd have to tell them, look, I love you, but I don't love your behavior. I want you to listen and give me 5 minutes here.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of the same thing you got to do here. Focus on the behavior, not on the individual. Avoid the you should have, would have, could have stuff. But that's for another topic. But I also, the other bit I learned to help with the purpose, my role as the leader is to help them achieve what it is they want out of their career. And novel concept, if I ask them what they want, the likelihood of me being able then to be able to assist them from not asking is much higher. So it's kind of what do you want for yourself? And that was, there's 5 profoundly simple steps to goal development. And I would tie it into your cadence. What you taught me is that have a goal, establish the key activities to achieve the goal. You got to implement it. Step 3, and you assess the skill, will, and readiness level at that time. Step 4 is monitor the progress. Step 5 is throw off discouragement. Steps 4 and 5 is your cadence meetings.
Yes.
So, I really like that. And I like how you're going to, take it and start tying in here to the 7th, with the different, how teams develop. And there's key, why don't you walk us through, if you could, the 4 different stages.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned something in that step 6 that's critically a tie-in to step 7, which is the onboarding process. Because when you're talking about that sense of mission and purpose, core values, the vision for the company, all those things that unify us as a team and give us a common ground, the onboarding process is the perfect time to do that, as well as assimilating that individual into the team. And the first step in step 7 of the Tuckman process is forming. As a team, even though a company's employees may have been together for a long time, as soon as one employee leaves and one employee joins the firm again, you have to be intentional to reform as a team. You think it's no big deal, it's just one individual. One individual can completely disrupt the flow of the team. Who is this person? What do they know? Are they going to chip in? Are they going to hold their own weight? Are they going to need me to explain things? Are they going to take a lot of my time away from what I'm doing?
Are they doing my role now? Wait a minute, what happened?
Exactly. Yeah. Are they going to have to play by the same rules as we play by? It's just a myriad of this stuff. And so an onboarding process reaffirms how we operate as a team and is a critical first step to the forming or reforming of your team. Because the most important attribute of effective forming is to create a sense of fairness and security for the team. Think about that. That's building trust, right? How do I know I'm safe and secure? Because I can trust the other people on the team. I can trust my leader. How can I trust them? Because they do what they say they're going to do. They get out ahead of things and set expectations, and then those expectations are met consistently. And when that happens, I trust you and I trust the other people. That's a safe environment to work in and operate in. Then I can effectively go through the next and most critical stage of the Tuckman model, which is storming. That's when, hey, all the kumbaya and campfire chats are over, and we're actually trying to get on with our work and we're bumping into each other. I got a different way of thinking about this and doing this than you do. I like my way better than your way. And I could talk all day about that, because conflict, everybody knows, abounds. But if we don't have a good solid foundation, it's kind of like grass, right? If the grass roots aren't deep in the soil, as soon as the sun comes out, it withers up. We're the same way in relationships. We have to nurture the roots in relationships to build that critical trust, so that when the heat comes out and we're storming, we're having conflict, we can weather that storm and get through it. Because the storming, the conflict is absolutely essential to getting to the next phase, which is to define what we're going to be about, what we're going to pursue, what are the goals, how are we going to get there. And that's that plan and the execution of that plan. And then the fourth step, just to lay it out there, is the performing. And that's where the cadence comes in, right? Once we've established the game plan, everybody knows what role they're playing and what the rules are that we're playing by, and they're being managed consistently and fairly by the leadership, then we can get on with performing. We can execute. And that cadence helps us to stay on track with it, manage those expectations, sometimes reset expectations, and then constantly be inspiring and re-inspiring better behavior along the way.
When it's amazing, I'm going to change the names to protect the innocent, but I've been in a situation where a top leader has come down below middle management and started yanking employees into an office and grilling them about what they do and how they spend their time, and the impact of that on the soft side to a team is really shocking to see how emotionally they start to react to their normal routines being disrupted. Now, there are times where that could be appropriate, but it was amazing to me. I've never seen anything like that or been a party to anything like that before, but I was asked, because I had just started at that company, to sit in on these meetings. And it was the first time that I had met many of these people. And to watch their level of discomfort and then the kind of fallout of going to see them in their environment and just nothing was happening. People weren't really working. There was all this odd silence and discomfort. It was really, really an amazing process to watch. That kind of impact can be devastating.
Well, absolutely. But then what you just saw was poor leadership, right? And no leadership is better than poor leadership, because here you saw someone come in, usurp the power of the person that was supposed to be reporting to him, managing this group, and without any, what I'm hearing, communication, etc. So there's boundary issues. So they just bounced up on boundary issues. So that's giving a real mixed message to that new, the reporting manager, who he's doing what he thinks maybe is a 360. But that, even if it's a 360, it would be communicated to the troops that 360 is going to be happening. I want you to speak openly, because that's going to help me improve as your leader. It's, what is occurring here is what Todd was alluding to earlier, is the trust factor just gets, the air just gets sucked out of the balloon in the situation you just described. And with that trust, if you have people's trust, your details don't matter. If you don't have their trust, all the details in the world aren't going to help you out. So that would be a mountain, I suspect, to climb out of, with what you just described. And I think if you follow these steps, what Todd just laid out here, from the form and storm and Norman performing, and look at each of these stages and what should be the team's function, and then what are the critical issues here, and what are gaps, and gaps here, like in that forming stage. Boy, you want to get down real clear boundaries of how meetings are going to be run, how conflict's going to be addressed. decisions are going to be made, for instance. That should all be should be addressed, as long as the guiding principles or values of that organization. Treating every individual with respect, I think, should be a value of many organizations, not all, first and foremost. And that was not treating one manager with respect. So I look at it, great scenario you described there, Dan, and there's a lot that can be learned from these mistakes that we witness, and probably many of our listeners witness, and and you either and I'll finish up with this: you can either borrow or buy your experience. I was in a great position for 2.5 years where I got to co-run a region down the Southwest, and I learned more from borrowing and learning, meaning I was able to learn from other people's mistakes and time, versus buying. You're paying for it yourself with your time, your money, your resources.
I think these are really important points, guys. I really do. I think we have to, as leaders, realize our biggest enemy when it comes to our employees is fear. And what we're talking about is trying to stem off fear. And one of the biggest provocateurs of fear is not knowing what's going to happen, predictability, right? What can I expect? What can I predict is going to happen? The less we know about what to expect is lingering around the corner, the more it stimulates anxiety. So when you talk about somebody just one-off, probing and asking questions and doing whatever like that, it just creates all kind of fear and anxiety. This is out of the ordinary. This is different. I didn't expect this.
And it's the big boss. Come into my office.
Wait a minute. What does this mean? Right? And that's the big question. That's when the filters start flying off.
And everybody else is, what's going on with Joe in Big Boss's office?
They're asking the same question. What does this mean to me?
Yeah. And
am I next?
And you've raised another great point. And I'm since left this world, and one of my mentors of all mentors, Jim Choate, and he would say, look, as a leader, you want to be consistent and you want to be predictable. Consistent and predictable.
Yes.
And that's with all your people. So, and he also, one thing he did that I always, did many things, great team builder. But frontline management, first time you become a manager, and we'd have we teach them situational leadership, and it was kind of the training managers workshop. Did he have to do it? No, but he made sure he was at every one of those, because he wanted all of his to be able to start forming, getting his thought leadership down. Here's how he thinks, here's how he makes decisions, so they understand what he's trying to build here and grow here. So It's a best practice I never lost. I'd always make sure I was at one of those, new orientation leadership development meetings.
Well, this is a real challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs, because the assessments tell us that by and large, I would say the majority of entrepreneurs are high DIs on the DISC scale, right? And high DIs tend to be your idea people. Let's move forward. Let's charge hard. Let's come up with lots of ideas. Let's get creative. And they're disruptors by nature. They're constantly innovating and coming up with something new. And that provokes every fear and anxiety possible in employees, because it's this constant change, it's this constant something new. And then you have this dynamic conflict between the business owner, the entrepreneur, and the employees, because I hear it all the time. Why don't they just do it? Why don't they just get it done? Why does it take so long? And what you have is you have this resistance that comes, forces met with equal and opposite force kind of thing. As hard as they're charging forward, the employees are pulling back because they're like, I don't know what to expect that you're leading us into, and we don't trust you in that. Because other times when you've led us down this path, it's blown up because we weren't prepared. You didn't cover the steps. And it's so hard for leaders to slow down in order to speed up.
Mm.
Well, and to link back to one of the things you said was you started out this episode. In this current crisis, we kind of got stuck on playing defense. And to a large degree, that isn't anybody's fault. This isn't something you can look back at and say, oh, hey, you should have known how long this was going to last. But to that point, I started to realize it probably towards the end of last summer. And I started to see a few companies. First thing that popped up that really made me see that we were kind of stuck as it related to the business world was someone came up with a virtual chief of staff position at a large company. And that person's role was simply to figure out how to connect senior management and the rest of the company in a virtual world.
Yeah.
And now we may go back to something resembling 2019, where people go into offices on a consistent basis. But the reality is that this toothpaste, to a large extent, is out of the tube.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that really enjoy working remotely. It improves their lifestyle. It can be done, and it can be done effectively. The question then is, we need to start trying to live in that world rather than playing defense and pretending like everything is going to go back to the way it was. Even if it does, we still need to have this arrow in our quiver to be able to perform in a virtual space. What things does a leader need to start out with from that standpoint to really start going down that world?
And I'll let, I think this brings us up to, really kind of the end here. And I want to do a shameless plug for Todd. I would say, it's everything Todd has been preaching here, Dan. Just go start with the stages of team formation and just walking through the steps. That would be the key. And I've, Dan, you and I have hired out Todd and when we were previously running an organization to come in to help us facilitate, in that case, it was our annual business planning. But in this case, I would pull back and I would just start and do an assessment on where we are as a team and walking through these steps here and find the gaps. And so I'd encourage our listeners to reach out to Todd. It's a shameless plug, but the man is very good at what he does. He's got this mastered, as I'm sure you can tell from the conversation here. You don't hear the ums and ahs like you hear from me. This guy's got it down.
I appreciate that, Philip. I love it, though. I mean, it's fun because it's opportunity, right? I mean, it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. And if business owners specifically are willing to slow down long enough, just long enough, not indefinitely, but long enough to just do an assessment of their business, it probably is not a complete re-engineering of the business. It's just shoring up some critical things and stop gapping a few other things. And that can be done pretty efficiently. I'm going through that with several businesses right now. The whole pandemic thing has forced their business model to change in certain ways. They didn't realize how they had adapted on the fly. And just stepping back and realizing that helps them to shore up their core business again, and then get everybody on the same page, get some organization around it, and charge the hill again and go at it on offense. Get out of that defense, start going on offense, and do it in a way that's not going to create chaos and provoke all those fears and anxieties that we just got through talking about in the employees and the rest of the staff.
Well, let's take that as a great point to wrap up for the week on our main section. I want to give everyone Todd's contact info in case you want to reach out to him. His website, roicoachingsolutions.com, or you can reach him via email, todd@myroicoach.com. Or lastly, you can reach him via phone at 704-634-3180. Again, 704 634-3180. Now let's transition quickly. Normally we let our guest go, but we have a very short article for the article review this week, and it ties directly into our topic that we've been discussing for these last 2 weeks. Significant disconnect between employees and execs on returning to offices. It literally is about a 5-paragraph article. Essentially, it boils down to the fact that in this survey, executives, 60%, 59%, believe that we're going to return to working in the office full time. And only 20% of employees believe that they should come in at least 3 times per week. So obviously just a gigantic disconnect. Now, some of this may be the way in which the survey was worded, but it certainly speaks to the fact that employees are ready to make this leap into the virtual world. And there may be some executives out there that aren't. Although, Todd, you had mentioned when we discussed this article previously that you had some information that some execs may be more willing to embrace this.
Well, we have to remember that in the pre-COVID world, employees equaled real estate, which equaled cost and overhead. So there's a very pragmatic reason why, especially larger companies, are embracing this virtual environment. They're going to save a ton of money on real estate. One of my largest clients now, a 20,000 employee company, had just put out notice internally that this year they're going to cut back real estate by 50%.
Wow.
So 50% of their employees are going to be working from home 50% of the time. So they're going to dramatically cut back on real estate, and they're embracing it, and it's going to mean a big difference in the way they manage their teams, like we've been talking about, with the more touch points, creating more opportunity for live video conferencing and things of that nature. You have to get creative to keep people engaged in a virtual environment, but they're adapting, and they're going to continue to adapt, and they're going to embrace this virtual opportunity.
Well, and I keep getting pestered with job offers, people wanting to connect. I always talk to recruiters, try and connect to other people. Someone once told me you can't turn down a job you haven't been offered. I can't remember exactly who that was. It might have been Philip. But one thing I've noticed is, I would say it's roughly in this percentage. About 60% of the offers I see say remote for now, but you're coming back into the office. As opposed to, there's a significant number, but it's certainly not the majority that say this is a permanently remote position. Now, the question then becomes, for those that say they're going to come back into the office, does that mean full time? What does that look like? Right. Those kind of things. It sounds like your big client might be doing some kind of rotating, like space sharing, right? Mm-hmm. Where you have a desk, but you share it with someone else. And that's the one that leaps out at me, is if people really take a step back and look at the costs involved in running a business, as you said, employees and the space that they occupy is a gigantic portion of your overhead.
Yes.
I struggle sometimes with, is it just the petty tyrant nature of some large management structures that they just want to see people in the office to feel like they have a control over what work they're doing?
I don't think so, Dan. If I jump in on this one, I don't. I think, I was just reading McKinsey and Company, and you guys have heard me say, allude to them or reference them earlier. And they're showing, they've done that survey of 800 some executives, and commercial real estate, as Todd mentioned, in the central and downtown areas, it's gonna be reduced by 30%. So they're not saying full time, but they're thinking 3 to 5 to 3 days a week on average. Just what it's saying here, but there'll be also, but if it's going to be around team building or brainstorming, or look, we got to make key decisions here, that's the time they're going to pull the people in back into the office. It's going to have a purpose.
Right.
And I think that's what we're going to see. And I think that's, I think with step 1 or step 2 of Todd's is, if I was an executive now, I'd be looking at what tasks can be, go through all my different tasks of the, of each and every employee's role, and what can be done at home and what needs to be done would be better done in person. And I would step back and look at it that way. And there's a difference here now, but I do have faith that, one thing, the Americans do get it right. Our economy didn't go down nearly as bad as the rest of the world's during this pandemic. Some of these companies, I thought, were small business. 90% of all the companies are owned by families. And you take some of these restaurant people who are, they're the biggest ones impacted, that are always seeing people, and the tourists and travel, they're going to be impacted. But what did they do? They thought on their feet, and they said, you know what, we're going to start doing curbside. We're going to lay off the cash register people and other people on the inside, but we're going to get creative, and we're going to meet people in their and deliver it to their cars and have them do drive-bys. I think there'll be change. It's not going to go back to normal. There's going to be a new normal. Don't know all what it means, but as my old hockey coach would say, keep bent knees and you won't get knocked over. Be flexible.
Todd, before we let you go, want to ask you our special question. What pearl of wisdom or saying have you gotten from a friend, family member, or mentor that has been especially meaningful to you?
I would have to say El Fido, L-F-I-D-O. Learn from it and drive on.
Oh, El Fido. I like that.
Have a nice little statue of a dog, a German Shepherd, with El Fido underneath it.
The quivering masses of availability is going to be not just an arrow, but a saber in my repertoire. As a former wholesaler, that is literally the best description of the job.
I think we can all relate to that one, right?
Very good. Great having you aboard, Todd.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy being with you guys.
If you have topics that you would like us to cover in a future episode or questions for us, you can email us at info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. You can also find us on social media. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook links are all at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. Wherever you find your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, please take the time to like, review, subscribe, and share. We also have a YouTube channel. You can search Value-Ability on YouTube to find us there. Or you can find us on our website, value-ability.com, under the Episodes tab. Next episode, episode 52. Very excited to have the former president of Ameritrade and now an investment banker, Mike Anderson, is going to be joining us to talk about selling businesses and working with financial advisors who have clients that have businesses that they are looking to sell. And very interestingly, I'm sure we will talk about the fact that investment banking involves neither investing nor banking. In our warm-up conversation, one of the things that leapt out at me and I find intensely amusing. What questions do you have about selling a business or advising a client on selling a business? Reach out to us and let us know so we can ask Mike next week. As always, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next week. And remember that financial success comes from creating a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will get you there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.